still, I feel like from the trauma, I don't have like the greatest memory of everything, but I do remember like my mom one, I think she left her house when she was like 16 or 17, so she was kind of like on the road living her life. And she was into drugs and stuff like that. For example, like whenever I was like, she's I think tried a lot of them.
Mm.
Maybe not like gone as deep as like heroin or anything like that, but pretty much anything else that's not, like you're stabbing yourself with a needle, she's probably tried, at least. And when you're in that kind of community, thankfully she wasn't on anything when she had me or whatever, but she was still around like those kinds of people, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And her nature is like always been to like be too trusting and like too nice. So she would have these kinds of people around her and then invariably kind of get like taken advantage of, you know what I mean?
Mm.
Whether it be like monetarily, or just get into an abusive relationship, like physically and, what's the word, verbally abusive.
Yeah.
Uh, so like some of my earliest memories, like my one of my earliest memories, honestly, is being in like a daycare center. I was staying with people that I don't even remember or know anything about because my mom was in jail for like a couple months or up to a year. I can't remember exactly, but
Mm.
and it was like the daycare's what's it called? Um, like nap time. I didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
nap or whatever, and then I think I was just laying down and I happened to look over and I saw like my mom, through the window. I hadn't seen her in however how long. I didn't know, as a kid, I didn't know, I didn't understand that she was in jail, and I just know she
Mm-hmm.
was gone. You know what I mean? And so like there's moments like that. There's moments where because she was like even when she wasn't doing drugs, which I don't think she ever did drugs when she after she had me,
Mm-hmm.
but she was always around these types of people where, you know, the kids were trying to like smoke cigarettes, and I'm like 5 or 6 years old at the time. They're trying to like break into my mom's car and get cigarettes, and I'm like, no, I'm gonna like go tell my mom. And since there's like three of them, they'll like grab me and like throw me in a ditch and then just like do what they want, like stuff
Jeez.
like this. So, yeah, it's like, I mean, so there's like moments like this, um, and there was a couple times where because we would kind of be reliant on the kindness of others and find out like they're really not that kind. I had times where we were staying in a mobile home. We didn't have like water or electricity. We left, and I guess I found out later that we were like behind on rent, and we come back. All our stuff is in a pile, or maybe two piles, or something like that. And the landlord, ends up like setting fire to like some of our stuff. You know what I mean? And kicking us out. So there's like moments like these interspersed with just like not knowing what the hell's going on as a kid, you know? And there's like little bits of like sexual abuse, thankfully nothing crazy, but I had immediately after that one, we went with like, I don't know how my mom knew them, but they were like a super religious family.
Mm.
But the older, their daughter, who was like maybe 9 when I was like 5 or 6, um, just was like a freak, man. And she was like always trying to like she would throw her panties at me and try to sit on my face when I'm trying to like nap. So there's like things like this, which as a kid and not having any kind of litmus test, like you knew it wasn't right, you know what I mean? But
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't ever something like I also didn't have a dad. Obviously, I'm talking about my mom a lot.
Yeah.
My dad wasn't around. Um, there was never like a moment where I felt like, oh man, my life is fucked up, or this, because it was just like life. I was just living
Yeah.
it, you know. I always describe it because like people ask me about the dad thing sometimes as like, oh, did you ever like wish you had a dad or like missed your dad or
You're
anything?
like,
But like,
I didn't know dad, the
yeah,
concept.
exactly. I never saw like a positive male figure probably until I started Japanese jiu-jitsu. Until then, like
Mm.
guys that I knew were like men were the people that would like hit you or slap you or like, just make you do stuff, and they weren't really to be trusted, you know what I mean? So
Yeah. Wow.
um so it was like I didn't really feel like I was missing anything, but I know obviously like going through that trauma, even though I perceived it as normal at time, I was totally like internalizing things that
Mm.
for me ended up mostly manifesting as like super low like self-worth, you know what I mean? So all these bad things were happening to me, so I felt like, okay, so it's just normal for like someone to treat me like shit, like that's just like
Mm.
all right. You know what I mean? Obviously
Yes.
it's not,
Yeah, but yeah. Oh
but
man.
in the moment, you just expect it. So like the first time I saw what I would consider uh like a positive family unit, you know what I mean? Like a loving father and mother and all that kind of stuff. Everybody getting along was like when I was like 16 or 17. Yeah. So it was like through time, and then thankfully, like as you were kind of saying, like, yeah, parkour totally was like this kind of coping mechanism, almost like a self-flagellation kind of like, masochistic, discipline for me, because I still had this low self-worth, and I felt like, for me, maybe I was worthless, but I could still create something of worth, if that made sense.
Yeah.
And so that I had that mindset in like the early years, which, like I said, helped me train super, super hard. Thankfully, I was lucky and didn't get like injured, like in a bad way that I couldn't keep pushing. But I also think because of this like martial art mindset of progress, I was finally able to understand like and take parkour not just as like the physical sport of it, but that discipline of overcoming the obstacles, and then slowly, realizing like, okay, I have like some mental and emotional issues that I need to sort out as well. So I think it was, I mean, I know it's like the super most cheesy thing to say, but like martial arts and parkour definitely, I think, were instrumental in like probably saving me as like a human being,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a bit
Wow.
heavy, right?
No, man, that's an incredible and like harrowing story for sure, man. Thank you for sharing. Like, when did you realize that some of this stuff was like unhealthy? And like, because I think that's something that true. It's like so hard, and like you have this void that you're talking about.
Yeah.
This low self-worth. You feel special, you feel good again, or you feel like you might be worth something when you start to achieve things, and you see, incremental progress. You're like, all right, at least I can create that. I like actually the way you put that. It's an interesting way. It's just like, I can create something of value even if I'm of not value.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
definitely a mindset that can really push you. And then we see some of like the most explosive, like powerful, like even like prolific, influential figures in anything, but especially in sports and stuff like that. Especially in martial arts, I would say even. But some of these guys are working through that that sort of existential crisis. Can you tell me more about how your individual journey was, and like when you started? How did you shift it? Like, what did your practice? How did it evolve through that problem and that solution?
Yeah, I mean, so like in the beginning, obviously, I'm not even like aware of it, right? You're just like doing kind of what feels right. And pushing yourself and trying to train super hard, but you don't really have a concept. At least I didn't have a concept of overtraining or anything like that. I didn't think, like I had at that time zero, sports science like knowledge or research under my belt, and so it was pretty much just like, okay, like the harder you train, the better you're gonna get. So just like push as hard as you can,
Yeah.
all day, every day, and thankfully as like a young kid, going through puberty and all these kinds of things, you're pretty resilient for that kind of stuff. So there's not really like a better time to do that. I never had any issues with like Osgood slaughters like some people get, with the growth plates. I'm short as hell, was always short as hell. So I was already ready to go, impact wise, thankfully. But yeah, I think it was just as parkour started to become more for me than just just like a thing to do, as I started trying to like integrate it in my life, as I saw that there were these other opportunities. I was like one of the first, I think, sponsored athletes in the US through American Parkour and the Tribe, because at the time when I got signed up with them, they were sponsored by K-Swiss, because Sebastian Foucan was doing like the Ariake thing with them, trying to sell $130 shoe to the poorest sports.
I got a pair somehow.
Yeah. No, and they gave out so many free pairs.
Yeah, they gave out some free ones.
But like as I started to see this, I think also as like a viable career path, and then just through like the natural, I think, curiosity that I had is seeing kind of pushing towards the edge of like what's more, realizing like, okay, I can physically and technically push the limits, but and mentally through like a fear side, right? There's that obviously in parkour. But I think one of the things that interested me most is kind of like what I call like that horizontal progression, right? So you can always take a jump bigger, or you can do like a more difficult skill,
Yeah.
or you can add, more and more height or risk or consequence. And that's one way in my mind that you can kind of push, push your jumps, push your vaults, push your flips in a vertical fashion. But then the other aspect of it is like, how many different ways can you do that jump? How many different ways can you do that vault, that flip, that swing, whatever? And so I think through this, I don't really know how I got interested in it that way. Maybe it's because like as a smaller dude, I was not ever like the biggest
You're not
jumper.
gonna have like the biggest broad jump.
Exactly.
It's gonna be some 6'12" guy.
Yeah, exactly. 6'12" guy, exactly. Yeah, so like I could jump, all right for my size, but there's always gonna be someone with bigger jumps, and so, but the way that I found that like instead of being discouraged by that, it was fine to support the people that like, yeah, man, like Mitch Todorovic, you're gonna like fly, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'll be over here doing this weird like spinny stuff, but so I think through that interest, it started coming into that concept of like, okay, well, mentally, yeah, there's like the fear side. There is this creativity side of seeing how else you can apply the skills, but what other like mental ways can you challenge yourself, And I think first of all, like as is natural, I think for any young person getting into a thing, they kind of like wrap their whole identity in with that, right? So like that's where the worth
the big mistake that I made.
Yeah, everybody makes it.
No, everyone makes it, right? Yeah.
And so it's like,
but it's total. It's a classic.
Yeah. So like my worth now, because as me as a human being, still not having worth, I can wrap my worth up into what my parkour level is, which is great when you're doing good. But then when you're injured or when you, have a bad day, then it's like, everything tanks. So through seeing this and then realizing later on through like some romantic relationships and stuff like that, these other things that I had wrapped up into my identity, like being like a man of my word, like if I made a promise, I would keep that promise no matter what, for example, which I think like general guidelines with life are cool. But when you create these like hard and solid black and white rules, this is when you can kind of get into some like sticky business, because as much as humans would love to, delineate anything into good and bad and black and white, like the world is just 100% not that, depending on our perspective, everything's different. So I think like when my first start towards like unwrapping myself from being, my worth only being tied to my parkour ability was when I was like, what was it? Must have been like 2009 or 2010. And like the Cliff Notes version of it was essentially like I committed to a lady and the relationship was fine, but I took what was like a strong connection with a female, and because a man and hormones and all that stuff, immediately said,
wait, how old are you?
33 now, yeah.
No, how old
was
you?
I?
So
yeah,
like
18 or 19 or something like that.
Baby.
Exactly. And, you
hormones.
have a connection with someone and you immediately think, okay, well, she's of the someone I'm attracted to, and I have a connection, so that must mean like we're going to like be romantic, you know what I mean? Or be intimate or whatever. And so even from the beginning there were red flags, but it was one of those things where as a man of my word, I said we were, committed, and it ended up being one of those relationships that I think in the long term we learned a lot, and I think there's stuff that I can say was positive for sure, and we definitely like loved each other in our own way, but it was just not healthy for either of us, and it got to the point where through, arguing constantly and the similar situation, like she was probably my first like committed relationship, you're just like, well, maybe this is just how relationships are supposed to be, you don't have any other litmus test to base it off of, especially if you didn't have like a mother and father with like a good relationship or anything like that. And so I ended up, through time, I think we were together like almost 4 years, and she had some health problems and stuff like that. But the main gist of it was that I felt just empty all the time. Like I was putting energy out, but neither of us, the way that we loved was received by the other, if that makes sense. You know,
Mhm.
I'm not like fully ascribed into like this love
The
language
love
type
languages,
thing.
yeah, but that's
But
a
it's like
it's
that
a
concept.
language to talk about
Yeah,
love.
exactly. And
It's
so
a certain language.
we
It's a
didn't vibe in
vocabulary.
that way. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was like suicidal. At the time, I was having, I had a job as a pastry chef, and I was like doing my parkour stuff on the side. And because my pastry chef job was like pretty good, and I had like a life insurance policy and tied in with it,
Mm-hmm.
and I would take my motorcycle to work every day. You know, there was these moments where I'm crossing like bridges and be like, well, I feel like nothing I can do is good enough for her,
Mm.
and she didn't want to go back to her family, but so the least I could do is like have an accident, and then
Oh
at
my
least
God.
she would have some money. I would not be in pain anymore, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then obviously eventually I was like, yeah, this is not a normal way to think. Like, what the fuck are
That's.
you thinking?
I mean, thank God you recognize that.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's
exactly.
like it's a totally understandable state of mind to get in, and you know, almost everyone in their lifetime gets. Not everyone, but a lot of people
Yeah.
in today's world, because there's so much sickness and disease in like
Yeah.
whatever, and I
No,
would
it's
open
tough.
that can of worms. But basically, it's not uncommon that people get to
Mhm.
that suicidal position,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, yeah, every culture has its own like brand of it.
or just like it's like I'll just. I mean, yeah, especially on the bike, you're like, well, I'm going fast.
yeah,
Could happen
exactly.
like in the next moment. It wouldn't be. It's just you entertain that stuff, and then you're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I probably shouldn't be thinking like that.
Yeah, it's like I think I've seen like on Twitter or whatever. It's like, oh, do you have any depressive thoughts? He's like, yeah, well, doesn't everybody? He's like, no.
Some people don't.
So, yeah, thankfully, exactly. I realized like this is not a normal way to feel, and then through therapy, like we did couples therapy at first, and I'm realizing like I'm lying to this therapist,
Mm.
and then I'm asking myself it's afterwards like why, you know,
Mm.
what's the whole purpose of me lying to this therapist, and then realizing actually I'm just lying to myself to like take. We had, of course, like I said, nothing is fully black, fully white or whatever. So we had good moments in these relationships, and I would hold on to those good moments like, you know, like they were the relationship, and
Mhm.
not, and put a blind eye to all the negative sides. And so once I like realized that I was doing that, and then through, like I said, the therapy, and then just like this, I don't know, self-awareness or this interest in meta thought, you know, thinking
Mhm.
about my thoughts or whatever, I realized or had traced it back to the fact that like, oh, okay, because I wrapped into my identity this idea that I will always stick to my word, you know, I'm actually lying to myself. I'm lying to this like therapist,
Mm.
and it's
Yeah,
all
you
because
centered around this one thing,
yeah,
and then it actually paradoxically makes you the opposite of this.
exactly.
Like, you know, whatever you decide you're gonna be, I'm gonna put myself in this box.
Mm-hmm.
You'll fucking find yourself anywhere but inside the box.
100%.
It's so crazy.
So I realized that, and then was like, okay, it's because I committed to her. You know, we weren't married or anything, but I
Mm.
had verbally committed to her. And then I asked myself then, okay, so what if I just say it's over then? And then I realized like just the thought process of times like, okay, like, yeah, maybe it'll be harder for her in the beginning, but like every moment that we're together, we're more likely to be fighting than enjoying each other's time. So it's like just pure logic. It's
Mm.
probably going to be better for both of us in the long term if we end it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And as soon as I, like, as you said, like I put myself in this box, I thought of it as like I put myself in the prison, right? It's like
Mm.
there's like the two types of prisons, the one where you can
Yeah.
see the bars and the ones where you can't see the bars. Like I had no idea through my own identity of being a person of my word had put myself in this prison where I ended up, you know, being suicidal and in like in a overall negative relationship for, you know, 3 or
Mm.
4 years. And so it was funny though, once I realized that it was like a switch, like I felt like everything went better. It was almost like a movie. Like I could
Mhm.
hear like the birds chirping. I felt like my driving skills were better. My like parkour
Wow.
skills were better. Everything, you know, and obviously it was a hard conversation and
Totally.
to like break up with this person or whatever. But,
But you get back that energy, that piece of you that
Exactly.
you sectioned off, and it's like a splinter of kryptonite in Superman. Even
Mhm.
if Splinter is gonna fucking take away all the powers, even
Yeah.
if he might be a man, just regular man,
yeah.
but he's not gonna be Superman unless he takes that little shard out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it was like this, I don't know if it's happenstance or whatever it is, but this like serendipitous event kind of helped me understand like, okay, I also thought of myself as a parkour person, someone that like knows myself and knows what I'm capable of, but I realized I had this huge blind spot. You know what I mean? And so I think that humbled me a lot in like the mental side of things. Thankfully, it didn't take me into like a place of like overthinking of self-doubt, but if it made me realize like, okay, there's a whole lot more to explore internally than I originally understood, you know, as like an 18 or 19-year-old kid or whatever.